your lecture number 3. And in this particular lecture, we are going to talk about classic theories of economic growth and development. If you are aware, and you basically would have learned that by particular kind of a debate in your other course as well, that, you know, economics basically started with the debate that why some nations are rich and why some nations are poor. Like, say, for example, if you look at the debate, the main debate in the book of Adam Smith, the book that he wrote in the name of Inquiry into the Nature and Causes of Wealth of Nations, the basic inquiry he was trying to make was about that, what exactly, along with a lot of other lines. One of the lines was that why some nations are rich and why some nations are poor. Now, different countries actually have adopted different kinds of growth strategies, and different countries have followed different economists for making their economies grow. Some of the countries have been successful into this, and some of the countries have not been successful as yet. Like, say, for example, we have a lot of regions which are so developed, like, say, for example, North America, even South Africa, say, for example, in some parts of the Asia. And but you also have got, along with these very developed regions, you also have got a lot of undeveloped regions. Like, say, for example, you have got sub-Saharan Africa, you have got many countries in the Asia that basically are not exactly developed. Even if you look at the neighboring country of South Korea, the North Korea is very much undeveloped. So this development is very much unequal in the world. Like, if you look around yourself, you find many instances, you find many countries which are at very high levels of development. And along with those instances, you also find a lot of instances of very low development in many of the regions around you. Like, say, for example, again, if you look at yourself, we are a kind of a developing country in the region. We are actually sitting with China, we are sitting with India, we are actually like neighboring with kind of other Asian economies, but still we are not basically as good in our economy as other countries are. Now, what makes a country grow? This is the question of many researches in economics. Like, say, for example, if you go to the Google and you just put the word economic growth, if you just put two words economic growth there, you will find in the Google Scholar thousands and thousands of articles and thousands of books talking about the linkage of this growth with very different kinds of variables. Like, say, for example, if you look at the literature available in the in the on the Google, you will find that many researchers basically have in question that what actually leads to economic growth, how different variables basically have got effect on economic growth. So we actually also have got different kinds of theories available. These theories provide different kinds of guidelines to the economies and the countries, and that basically help them understand that what exactly lead to growth. Like, say, for example, if you think about that, the growth happens when your technology grows. The growth happens when your saving grows. The growth happens when you basically have got more human resources. There are different kinds of theories basically which have actually explain different reasons for economic growth in different places. So in this particular lecture, we are actually going to learn about these all theories of economic growth and development. Through these theories, we will be learning, and we will be trying to learn that what makes an economy grow. Different kind of theories have found out different kind of important variables which may or may not have got very important effect on the economic growth trajectories of the countries. So if you look at this particular quote from Dennis Gole, the cruel choice, it matters little how much information we possess about development if we have not grasped its inner meaning. We need to learn that what exactly the development mean. What happens when you basically have got development? When what happens when you don't have got development? So the development is technically a kind of a thing that you need to understand. If you don't understand the meanings of the development, you may end up on the you may be going on the wrong direction. You may be taking the wrong path, and you may be achieving something that you may think that it is development, but perhaps it is not development. Like, say, for example, in Pakistan, many of the prime ministers and many of the finance ministers have always said about this, that look at that how many peoples are shifting from the use of cycles to motorcycles, from motorcycles to cars and from cars to good cars. And similarly, there are so many people who have got TVs at their homes. They have got so many people who have got internet connectivity at their homes. Of course, they may be some kind of indicators of economic growth and development, but they are not exactly changing the lives of the people. Why some people are able to actually afford motorbikes at the place of cycles, because perhaps they are taking loans, or they are not basically having and they are not basically contributing very much growth of the economy. So we need to understand what exactly is the development, what actually makes a country developed, what actually are the policies of the governments that may or may not help the developmental process in a country. Now, is like there is a question, and this very much relevant question asked in the literature. The question is that is development only an economic phenomenon? Is development only an economic phenomenon? There's a bit typo; it should be an. The answer to this question is no. You cannot say always that if you are only developing economically, you are actually developing. Like, say, for example, you may have a situation where you may have got a lot of incomes coming to the country, you may have got a lot of money, but if that money is not actually affecting the lives of the people, like, say, for example, what is happening with your human freedom? Like, say, for example, are we free to make our choices? Like, say, for example, be it is a choice of the government, be it is a choice of food, be it is a choice of education, be it is a choice of job, be it is a choice of anything. We are say, for example, how many choices do we have, and are we able to freely choose those choices? Like, say, for example, if you want to send your children to school, what kind of choices do you have? Do you have got choices of sending your children to good schools or not? That is what basically determines that whether you are developed or not. Similarly, reorganization and reorientation of another overall entire economic and social systems. You need to overhaul the overall system. You need to change the way basically things happen. You need to change the way people think. And the development is not only an economic phenomenon; it also involves changes in institutional. We have talked a bit about these kind of things in the last classes as well. Many of the economists, in which the leading economist is Ajimolu, who basically have supported the view that a country only grows when their institutions are strong. If your institutions are not strong, if you're institutionally weak, like, say, for example, your democratic institution is not functioning, your law and order institution is not working, your justice education institution is not working. Like, say, for example, when poor people go to get the justice, they don't get the justice they actually deserve. Similarly, when you go to the police department, what kind of treatment you get as a simple citizen? Similarly, what happens in the democracy? Like, say, for example, really the parties that basically should be representing the people are representing the people in the parliament or not. Similarly, you should also change the social fabric of the country. Society needs to be changed. Similarly, administrative structures and popular attitudes and even customs and beliefs, you need to believe. Like, say, for example, if you still believe in the traditional way of farming, like, say, for example, if you have got farmers who are still in belief that they can only grow their crops with the very traditional methods, like, say, for example, with bull carts, with, say, for example, by sowing seeds by hand, or cutting the crops by hand. That is not something going to help we as an economy, because if we all be very very traditional, if we are not taking the part in the race of the growth and development and technology in the world, we are not going to be any way near to the countries basically that have developed so far. Like, say, for example, the countries have adapted this technology very well, and the countries basically have been very very low, are open to that, and they are basically embracing the new trends and everything that is coming in the world. If you look at the different kinds of theories that we are going to talk about, perhaps we'll not be covering every single topic in the list of this particular slide, but of course we shall be covering many of them or talking about almost all of them. Like, say, for example, one particular school of thought thinks there is a structural change required. Structural change means like your structure has to be changed. Like structural change means, like say for example, if you are a country and it's an agricultural country, and if you are actually living in an industrial world, you need to transform your agricultural economy into industrial economy. This is overall structural change. Similarly, if you are living in an industrial age, but you are actually going for the knowledge based economy, like say for example, right now the revolution that we are having at this point of time in the world is the knowledge based revolution. Every country, whichever country has got possession of more knowledge, is growing higher. Any country that has got like hold of AI, they are growing a lot better than the countries that basically do not have got very good hand on AI. They are not basically, AI means artificial intelligence. Similarly, there is there is one other school of like theories which actually may be categorized as new colonial dependence theory. There may be an idea, like perhaps you may also think about it, that you may be not developing because we are stuck, we are basically like dependent on different countries. Like say for example, being a colony of the Britain for so long, we actually have got a very different kind of mindset. Like being a Pakistani government, you always depend on the world to actually help you in growth. We are not all the time creating the kind of an environment, or creating the tools, or creating the ideas which actually may help develop from inside. We actually always depend on the different parts of the world. And that the countries which depend on these regions, like say for example, if you are developing on the US, there is a very much trust deficit amongst the people, and that is what actually also have been proven, that these big countries do not let you develop. So according to this school of thought, the less development of any country is because of the role of the bigger countries like the US, UK, Europe, and other kind of powerful countries. Another explanation for the growth comes from new classical theory, which basically may be based on market-friendly approach. What kind of structure do you have got? Like say, for example, like if you know about the US, US is a market-based economy where all the economic decisions are made in the market. And similarly, you must have also heard about Russia. Russia was a kind of economy that was called the socialist economy, where the markets were not as powerful as they are in the US. So we have got a different kinds of approaches. Like some people think that the market can help you more. Some people think that governments can help you more. So we'll be looking at that different kinds of theories in this particular regard. The very first model that perhaps you need to learn is about the Rostow's linear stages growth model. This model was presented by W. Rostow. Rostow basically was an economic historian, and what he said basically, like that there is a lesson for developing countries from the growth of the developed countries. Like, say, for example, what he suggested, that if you look at the historical more transition of undeveloped countries to development, the developing countries or the poor countries can learn a lot from the developed world. Like say for example, if you somehow are able to know that how the Bill Gates has become Bill Gates, or how the Warren Buffett has become Warren Buffett. Similarly, how the Mark Zuckerberg, the CEO of the Facebook, has become Mark Zuckerberg. Like they are the people who are worldly the most successful people in the world, and they basically have got worth of billions of dollars. Like say, for example, you must have also heard about Jeff Bezos. Jeff Bezos and other kind of people, they are very much, like have got a very strong, economically, they have got very strong powers economically. Why have they become like this? If you follow their stages of development, perhaps you can actually learn how a person turns into a billionaire, how a person turns into, like, say, for example, many of the students read literature, like the habits, the 7 habits, or different kinds of habits of very highly effective people, highly successful people. And what do we try to learn from them? We try to learn that what habits of these rich people have made them rich. That is what this is something similar idea actually came from Rostow. Rostow basically has suggested that if you follow a linear stage model, like say for example, if you look at that how the countries have become developed, like say for example, if you look at UK, you look at US, you look at European economies, they were not as developed as they are forever. At one point of time in their economic history, they were very weak countries. They were solely dependent on agriculture, like as we were initially, like and now basically gradually we are breaking that kind of boundaries, and we are moving from the agriculture sector to perhaps to some kind of industry or some kind of technology knowledge based things. But this was the case basically with every country at certain point of time. The US, UK, Europe, every country was like a traditional society. But what they did, they actually did not remain traditional forever. In the second stage, what they did, basically they provided preconditions to take off. What happens? Like if you say, for example, if you have flown in the plane, like say, for example, if you take a ride or if you take a flight on the plane, what does the plane do? The plane basically before taking off create momentum. What does this momentum is all about? Like say for example, it generates speed, it creates kind of an environment in which the plane can take off. If the plane does not do these kind of things, it cannot take off, it cannot go into the sky, it cannot fly. It needs to build up some kind of momentum. Like say for example, similarly, if you really want your country to fly, if you really want your economy to fly, you need to provide preconditions, and these preconditions include everything. Like say for example, the basic infrastructure, basic kind of facilities. Like say for example, if your industry wants to produce something, they should be facilitated in terms of road infrastructure, in terms of policies, in terms of facilities, and they are all kind of preconditions of takeoff. Once you are able to provide required institutions, once you are able to create basic infrastructure, once you are able to give basic skills to the people in terms of education, training, and other kind of things, your economy reaches to the third stage of your economic development, that is called takeoff. What happens in takeoff? Takeoff is a flying stage. Your economy starts flying. And what happens when your economy is flying? Generally, this flying is basically is based on the how much investment is being made in your country, what kind of investments are coming into your country, and what kind of happening. Like say for example, like when your economy flies, it actually has got more investment to GDP ratio, it has got more investments coming, more capital creation is happening, people are actually playing their role. The traditional, like the infrastructure that you have put in place is actually contributing into your growth. Now if you are taking off, like say for example, if your economy is in the flying mode, what happens then? The countries try to go to actually reach the maturity period. Like say for example, for you as well, you must have observed in your educational life that getting good marks in the first semester perhaps is not very difficult, but sustaining those marks or those percentages that you get in the first semesters are difficult. Like say for example, in the first semester, if you are actually you emerge as a top student in the class, like say for example, you get 80-90% marks in the exam. Now in the first semester you perhaps have gotten this, but can you sustain this? This is something will be depending on your maturity. That's what basically happens. The countries try to be mature. They try to make these growth rates sustainable. Like say for example, what has happened in case of many developing countries, like say for example, the similar thing has happened in case of Pakistan as well, that Pakistan has had very long spikes of growth. Like say for example, in many of the periods, our growth was phenomenal. Like say for example, like if you look at the growth rate of, if you look at the period of 1960s, in the 1960s, our growth rate was very much like very high, very high growth rate. And but we were not able to sustain it even in the time of Musharraf, when you were perhaps at schools, or you were basically or like going to go to schools or something. That was also the period in which we had got a lot of growth episodes, but these growth episodes did not remain there for long because of the reasons that perhaps that we'll be discussing about. A country needs to be mature, it needs to make its growth rates matured in a sense, like say for example, you should be able to sustain them for a long period of time. And once you are up to the fourth stage, you reach to the fifth stage. The fifth stage is the stage in which people live a good life, where people basically make very high mass consumption. And that consumption is of everything. They are able to buy clothes, they are able to buy food, they are able to buy technology, they are able to buy housing, they are able to buy communications, they are able to buy anything that basically they want in their lives. So this only stage happens once you are actually up through this all four stages of economic growth. Like, say, for example, initially you were a traditional society, you somehow provided a platform for the economic growth and take off of your economy, and you took off, like, through your investments. And once you basically have taken off, you're actually go towards maturity. You actually become more sensible, you become more mature, you become more like, say, for example, that is what something. So, and this is what basically has happened with all of the countries. Like, say, for example, if you look at the growth trajectory of the US, or you look at the growth trajectory of the UK, Europe, or any other country in the world, you will find that they have all been through these all stages at certain points of time. Like in the beginning, all of these nations were traditional in terms of more of the people basically were employed in the agriculture sector, and their main dependence was on the agriculture sector. But to transform their economies from industrial sectors, from the traditional agricultural sectors to industrial sector, what they did, they provided the platform. Like, you cannot move from the traditional agriculture sector to industrial sector unless you have got infrastructure available. So in the second stage of their growth, they provided infrastructure, then they took off, and then they basically went for the drive to maturity, and then basically, they were somehow able to achieve the high mass consumption. Okay, so this is what something, this is the explanation of it. Like, perhaps you may basically leave, like, look at this graph here. What does this graph show? This graph shows that Rostow stages of development in the different stages. Like, say, for example, in the first stage, you are actually on the, pre-takeoff stage. Your growth is not there. But, in the takeoff, you basically, you actually fly your economy from T1 to T2, from time one to time two. You basically make your economy fly, and then you basically sustain it. And that is the period in which, like, say, for example, you may think of the US, UK, and Europe. There are many UK, European, and economies basically which are in the stage of high mass consumption. Okay. We are in the second part of this lecture. We are going to talk about the Harrod-Domar growth model. This is the growth model, which tries to explain that what your growth is dependent on. Like, say, for example, if you look at this particular equation here, if you look at here, like, say, for example, this equation here, what does this equation tell you? Like, this particular kind of the side, on the left hand side, you have got GDP growth rate. This is growth rate. Now, what is that growth rate equal to? This growth rate is equal to S over K. This little s, if you are aware from your macroeconomics, this particular s is the MPS. So it means that according to the final conclusion of this particular growth model, your growth is directly depending on saving rate that you have in a country. And that makes quite sense. What kind of sense it makes, and how this basically this final equation has been driven, we are going to look at in a minute. The second thing on which it basically, is dependent on that how much is the capital labor ratio in your country. If your capital labor ratio is, say, for example, high, then you basically have a kind of low growth. If this is low, you have got high growth. We'll be talking about that and what exactly this means. Now, as you remember from your basic macroeconomics understanding, that your saving is equal to little s into y. What is this little s? Little s is the marginal propensity to save. Like, say, for example, the amount that you save from your income is a fraction of your income, and that fraction is s, little s. Like, again, if you earn $100 and your saving is $10, so it will be 0.1 multiplied by 100. So 0.1 multiplied by 100, if your MPS is 0.1, if your MPS is 10%, 10% means that you save 10% and you spend rest of the 90%. So it would mean that, like, that your saving out of $100 income will be $10. Similarly, if your saving rate increases, like say for example, if your saving rate increase from 10% to 20%, now what do? You save not no do not or you don't save only the 10% of your income, rather you save 20% of your income and you just consume 80% of your income, like and you just spend 80% of your income in consumption. So this S is equal to little s into Y. Like say for example, this big Y is income, this little s is the percentage of the income that you save, so it gives you the saving. Another definition that we have discussed in our classes as well, that according to economics, investment is equal to the change in capital stock. We discussed very, very explicitly in the last class that if you are talking about investment in finance, that may mean a different kind of a thing. But in economics, anything qualifies for investment should be such which increases the capital stock. Capital stock means productive stock. Productive stock means machines, land, factories, and that kind of thing. So that is something I is should be equal to delta K. And another identity that you would have learned from your basic macroeconomics, the first model of macroeconomics, is that saving is equal to investments. Whatever amount of the money that you save, what do you do with that? You always save them. Okay. So if you are like, say for example, this is the, if you look at the little k, I'm sorry, the little k was the capital output ratio. Sorry for that. I just told you that it's a capital labor ratio, it's a capital output ratio. Capital output ratio means that how much output, actually, like how much capital you require to produce 1 unit of output. If this is high, like if you need more capital to produce small amount of output, your growth rate will be low. Again, I'm trying to explain you this little k. This little k is the value of, like, the rate of change in your capital with respect to output, that how much output you can produce, like how much capital you require to produce 1 unit of output, delta k over delta y. So this little k actually should be lower, like you should be requiring less capital to produce more output. This s should be higher, like little s should be higher. You actually should have got more saving to get more output. Like say for example, because if you have got more saving, you will have got more investment. If you have more investment, it would mean that you are actually producing more capital. If you have more capital, like it means that your productive capacity improves. Your productive capacity improves whenever you have got more, like capital available in the economy. So this is what basically is the idea here. Define the marginal capital output ratio as k is equal to delta k over delta y. You can find out from here the delta k. Like say for example, if you solve this question for delta k, what you can do is, like say for example, you can cross multiply this delta y with this k here. So you can find out the value of delta k. So what is the delta k is equal to? This is k little k into delta y, and this is the delta y, which is going from here to here. It is dividing on the right hand side. It will be multiplying on the left hand side. So it will, delta k will be equal to k into delta y. So as you know that the delta k by definition is equal to what? Delta k, according to the definition, is equal to investment. So it means that your investment is equal to capital output ratio multiplied by the output. So these are the different kinds of basic identities and equations that we have drawn from our basic understanding of the macroeconomics. Again, if I could recall you about this, the saving according to the macroeconomics is equal to the ratio of your income that you save. And this ratio is called MPS. Similarly, the investment according to macroeconomics is equal to delta K. Delta K is equal to the change in capital. If your capital improves, your capital increases, your investment increases. Similarly, this I is equal to S. According to basic understanding of macroeconomics, whatever savings you do not do it for unproductive purposes, rather you make them for investment purposes. Similarly, we define the capital output ratio, and this capital output ratio actually tells you that what amount of capital can produce amount $1 output. So if you require more capital to produce $1 output, it means that you are inefficient. If you require less capital to produce one unit of output or $1 output, then you are more efficient. So it means that this little k should be smaller and this little s should be higher. Now, what we did basically, we have actually found out the value of delta k from this equation, because we know that this delta k is equal to I and I is equal to s. So basically if you can find out this delta k from here and you multiply both sides by delta y, your delta k will be equal to small k into delta y. And this delta k is equal to I and I is equal to k into delta y. Okay. So now you know about that this I is equal to s. This I is equal to what? S. I is equal to S. And S is equal to S into Y. So what you can do is, we can replace this I with SY. The rest is the same, K into delta Y. And from here, if you just this cross multiply, if you take Y from the left hand side to the right hand side, and K from right hand side to the left hand side. So you get this equation. This is the final equation of Harrod-Domar model. And what does this equation tell you? This equation tells you that your output, growth rate of output, is directly dependent on the rate of saving of the country, and indirectly dependent on that how efficient you are in terms of use of your capital. If you can use, or you have small capital but you can produce more output with it, your economy grows. But if you are actually, like say for example, these similar situations are with the countries like Pakistan, where we have very little technology available, where we are not trained enough to use our resources in productive way. So what happens is that we are actually not utilizing our capital properly. So what is happening, that we are actually not getting most out of from your capital. So we are using more capital and getting less output. So it means that this is something that is very much a reason for our less economic growth. Now, according to this Harrod and Domar growth model, the sources of growth are two. The one is the saving rate, or the saving. The second is the investment in production of goods and services. So accordingly, your GDP growth rate is equal to S over K. S is in the numerator and little k is in the denominator, which says that S is directly affecting your economic growth and K is indirectly affecting your economic growth. Means that if your K increases, your economic growth decreases. And if your S increases, your economic growth increases. Okay. So S is a national saving ratio, K is a marginal capital output ratio. And here is the example that if S is equal to 6% and K is equal to 3, then your GDP growth rate is 2%. So this is what something happens. And if you increase them, you can perhaps see that how your growth rate changes. By increasing K, your growth rate falls. And if you are just basically, if you are just is something, is happening. So this given K is equal to 3 to raise growth rate to 4%, we need to increase saving by 6 to 12%. So this is what something, you require, that if your saving rate increases, your growth rate increases. But if your capital output ratio increases, your growth rate decreases. And by the increase in the total capital output ratio, we mean that you require to use more capital to produce $1 output. So we are now going to talk about the structural change models. What does that structural change means? When you say structural actually means that you are basically, changing the overall structure of the economy. By the overall structure of the economy means like either you are moving from the pure agricultural sector to pure industrial sector, from pure industrial sector to the knowledge-based sectors. So this is a structural change. Overall economy structure changes when these kind of changes come. So for that, you have got different models here. Like say, for example, the very first model that we study under the structural change model is the Lewis growth model or Lewis development model. What is that Lewis development model? If you perhaps you may agree with it, that like every country has got two sectors. Like say, for example, one is the agriculture sector, one is the urban rural area, where majority of the people are involved in agriculture sector. Their whole families, their whole people are involved in the agriculture sectors. Generally they have got very small piece of lands, and they basically employ all of their people on that particular land, and they basically get the output from there, and they basically feed their families with their pieces of land. Although they are very small pieces of land, but many of the people work on those lands, because all of those people basically don't have got any other option than working on their lands. So they just don't go to the schools, they don't go to the factories because they don't have got factories, they don't go to the industries because they don't have got industries, they don't go to other kind of jobs because they don't have got other jobs available. So everybody in the families, in the extended families, are involved into agriculture sector. So in this particular case, what happens, if you have studied the law of diminishing returns, the labor's productivity falls in the agriculture sector. In contrast to the agricultural sector, you have got urban centers. Although, these urban centers are now very much populated all over the world, but initially these industrial sectors or industrial regions, which are called the urban regions, were not as populated as they are today. And still, if you see, the urban areas of Canada, urban areas of the US, urban areas of UK, you still find shortage of the labor there. Now, what happens is, if you move, like say, for example, you think like this, that you have got one sector that has got surplus labor, and its marginal contribution to the total output is very low. What you do basically, if you shift that particular labor, small labor, like this actually the people actually who are having small contribution into the output, from agricultural dependent sectors to industrial development dependent sectors. Now, what happens is that if you move them from this particular sector to another particular sector, their contribution and their output may rise. Their rise in the output is basically, will be beneficial for the overall economy. The people who were not as useful in the agricultural sector may become very useful in the industrial sector. This is what Lewis suggested, that if you have got people who have got zero or negative marginal product, what you can do is you may transfer them, or you may basically move them from agriculture sector to industrial sector where their growth can be increased. Okay, like say for example, if you look at the slide, the first point actually says that the people basically involved in agriculture sector or subsistence agriculture sector basically have got very low or even zero marginal product. They are there, but they are not contributing anything. Sometimes they contribute negatively as well. On the other hand, you have got urban industrial sector where you may have got very high demand for labor, because urban industrial sectors basically use more machines and less labor. So what you can do is you can basically make the migration possible, and this migration can always benefit the country, because the people who have got very low or zero marginal product in agricultural sector can be moved to very high production industrial sector, and that production, that shifting, may increase the overall contribution into the economy, and that may increase the overall level of output in the country. So industrial, and that is what something that makes sense to so many people. But of course there are some criticism that industrial technology is generally capital intensive. They need more machines and less labor, so the demand for unskilled laborers may not be very much high there. So the people who are very much unemployed, very much having low output there, they may also not able to get jobs in the urban industrial sector because they are unskilled, and the industrial sector requires skilled people, or the people who are able to use machines. So industrialization must be supported by agricultural development to supply an ever increasing supply of food items. One other criticism that happens on this particular kind of a model is that you cannot destroy your agriculture sector to develop your industrial sector, because if you move all of your people from the industrial agriculture sector to industrial sector,